everyone, I'm Hone, and it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. This week, I'm doing a topic inspired by recent events in the Magic world. Right now, Black-Red decks are Tier 1 in Standard, and arguably the best deck there right now. And we also just heard that we will be returning to Ravnica after Core 2019, so I thought it would be a good time to look at the Rakdos color pair. In other words, cards that are both black and red. This isn't limited only to cards that are black and red and actually represent the Rakdos Guild from the plane of Ravnica, though 3 cards from that plane did make the list. Instead, I'm just talking about cards that are both black and red more generally. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score these lists. Pro Tour, Legacy Championship, and Vintage Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and Grand Prix top 8s are worth 1 point. Now, let's look at number 10. At number 10, we have a card from the plane of Innistrad, where black-red is most often associated with vampires, and that is Falcon Aristocrat. A 4-mana 4/1 with flying and haste can make you dead in a hurry, and this makes up for having only 1 toughness by being able to eat one of your other creatures to give it indestructibility. And if she eats a human, she also gets bigger permanently. A great resilient creature in the block and standard over time, she showed up in Rakdos and Jund aggro decks primarily, as well as black-red zombies and the Aristocrats deck, which got its name in part from this card, and aimed to sacrifice a bunch of creatures for value. She hasn't seen any play since rotating out of standard, and she isn't a great candidate to do so her spot on this list is pretty vulnerable going forward. At number 9 is the only card on the list to actually have Rakdos in its name, and that is Rakdos Return. This is a pretty nasty card. It's sort of a combination of Blaze and Mind Twist, and sort of a reverse Sphinx's Revelation. Rakdos' Return lets you do a bunch of damage to your opponent while simultaneously completely disarming them by making them dump their hand. Being able to win a game when someone casts this on you for 5 or more is pretty rare. In Standard, it saw play in a lot of the same decks that the Aristocrat did, as they overlapped in Standard for a while. This includes all 3 Jund variants, Aggro, Midrange, and Control, and Devotion to Black in the last months when it was in Standard, where a ton of mana could be dumped into this card using Nykthos. Like the Aristocrat, though, it hasn't seen play since rotating. At number 8, we have a card that not only has the Rakdos symbol on the text box, it actually appears in the art, and that is Bohr. This card embodies what both black and red are often good at, killing stuff. Bohr provides some very efficient removal that can even hit planeswalkers, and that is the kind of thing that will basically always see play. In Standard, it saw play in any deck that could cast it, which of course included the already mentioned Jund decks, but it also saw play in Reanimator, Zombies, and Devotion to Black. It has also seen play in Modern over the last couple of years, first in Jund decks, and more recently in Death's Shadow. At number 7, we have a card from Lorwyn, where the black-red color pair was most associated with goblins, and that is Murderous Redcap. A 4-mana 2/2 that does 2 damage to a creature or player when it comes into play, the Redcap also has Persist, allowing it to come back and do an additional damage after the first time it gets killed. In its standard environment, it was a good card. It saw play in decks like Revelark, which like to abuse Enter the Battlefield triggers, but it didn't truly get abused in that format. Instead, Modern would be its main home, where it could work in combination with Melira's Sylvok Outcast and a sacrifice outlet of some kind to do infinite damage to your opponent. Melira kept the -1/-1 counter from going on the Redcap after it died, so it just kept coming back and using its Enter the Battlefield trigger over and over again. You might say, well, that combo sounds like it takes at least 3 cards, and so it can't be that good, and I guess that's kind of true. Problem was that Modern format had access to Birthing Pod, which made creature-based combo decks incredibly consistent. Birthing Pod eventually got banned as a result of the deck, and Murderous Redcap has continued to see a little bit of play after the banning in decks that use Court of Calling and Collected Company in place of the pod, but it hasn't managed a top 8 at a premier event since 2016. At number 6, we have a legendary vampire, Olivia Valdaran, who is a 4-mana 3/3 flyer with tons of powerful text. She can do damage to creatures, which makes her bigger and makes the creature into a vampire, and she can steal creatures if they are vampires. She's absolutely insane, and the kind of creature that if left alive is just going to end the game between becoming larger and having an evasive ability and being able to pick off creatures or steal them. She was a big part of Standard when she was legal there, showing up first in Grixis control decks and then finding more permanent home in various Jund decks, whether control or mid-range. She was just an incredible win condition for those decks, and a big part of why Jund was so good in Standard. She pretty much filled the same role in Modern for a while as a finisher in Jund decks, but Jund has sort of fallen out of favor in Modern more recently, with Olivia last managing to pick up points in 2016, but I won't be too surprised if she finds a new home. At number 5, we have another card that actually depicts the Rakdos Guild, and that is Slaughter Games. Slaughter Games is a sideboard card, but an excellent one. It lets you dismantle combo decks, and the fact that it can't be countered makes it one of the best cards to sideboard against decks that are overly reliant on one card in their deck. In Standard, the various Jund decks ran this card as a way of disabling a combo involving Nightshade Peddler and Izzet Staticaster. In the latter part of its time in Standard, it was still being used. Lots of decks were reliant on Nykthos Shrine of Nyx, and this was a nice way of getting rid of it. It has also seen a fair bit of play in Modern, where it has been used to disable decks like Birthing Pod, Scapeshift, and Ad Nauseam. At number 4, we have a card that is a major part of why Black-Red is so good in Standard right now, and that is Unlicensed Disintegration. A powerful removal spell in a Standard with lots of nice artifacts, especially vehicles. Unlicensed Disintegration lets you kill a creature while also lightning bolting your opponent in the face the vast majority of the time. When it first appeared in Standard, its primary home was Rakdos and Mardu vehicle decks. It eventually started showing up in more Mardu Ballista decks, but now it is seeing play again in a new build of the Rakdos vehicles deck, and has put up some dominant appearances, including 4 top 8s at last month's Grand Prix Seattle, and at least 1 Grand Prix top 8 in every Standard event for the last several months. While it has been a dominant card in Standard, it has yet to see play anywhere else, and I don't think it's super likely that it does. It costs 1 more than you want to be paying for removal in a format like Modern, but it should be able to hang on to its spot on this list thanks to how heavily played it has been in the current Standard format. At number 3, we have a modal card, Kolaghan's Command. Easily the best of the command cycle from Dragons of Tarkir, Kolaghan's Command basically always guarantees you a 2-for-1 for only 3 mana. You can use it to make your opponent discard, to get a creature back from your graveyard, to destroy an artifact, or to do 2 damage to something. Basically, no matter what you choose, you are getting a 2-for-1. The options on modal cards like this are very powerful too, as they can be good against all decks because of their flexibility. Its power was realized pretty quickly, with it showing up all over in Standard in both aggro and control decks. This included Mardu and Rakdos aggro, Jeskai midrange, and Grixis control. However, while it was certainly played with some regularity, it wasn't exactly an all-star in Standard. Instead, it has become an important card in Modern. It has seen play there in Grixis control and in Jund, but both of those decks have seen a lot less play recently, and today it sees the most play in Grixis and Naiadesh Shadow decks, as well as Mardu Pyromancer, and it will continue to see play in those decks. At number 2, we have one of the most efficient removal spells there is, Terminate. For 2 mana, it can kill any creature at instant speed. It picked up 2 top 8s in 2001 at the Invasion Block Pro Tour in control decks. Terminate has had 2 separate shots at Standard because it was reprinted in Alara Reborn. Its first time through Standard, it showed up in Psychotog decks that added red for it and Flametongue Kavu, picking up a World's top 8 and 2 Grand Prix top 8s in that deck. Its second time through Standard, it saw a lot more play, primarily in the dominant Jund deck of Alara Standard. It saw play in Extended in a variety of aggressive Zoo and Jund decks, and in Modern it is a mainstay in Jund decks, though it has also done some work in the past in Grixis Delver decks, and more recently in Death Shadow Zoo and Mardu Pyromancer decks. It will continue to see play there. At number 1, we have a creature that can destroy lands, Fulminator Mage. It didn't actually do much in the Standard of its time, picking up only 1 Grand Prix top 8 in 2009, and it also only picked up 1 Grand Prix top 8 in Extended in 2010 in Travis Wu's Living In deck. Modern is where it has done the most work though, as there are non-basic lands everywhere. It first debuted in the format in Birthing Pod decks. It's something you can toolbox up if your opponent has a problematic land, and has seen play in the modern version of Living In, but has seen the most play in Jund. More recently, it has seen play in decks packing Collected Company, as it is a pretty good hit off of the card, and it also has a home in the sideboard of Death Shadow Zoo decks. It will only build on its lead on the other cards on this list since it still sees such consistent play in Modern. Even just so far in 2018, the Mage has added 11 points to its score. Well, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.